This video features some of the best fishing pole traps and Greek gift sacrifices that you will ever see on YouTube. And I'm talking about sacrificing your bishop on h7 or sacrificing your knight on g5 like that in an effort to checkmate black on h7 as highlighted on the board. This is what we'll be looking at up to the end, and you might say this video is some sort of a collection of all of my favorite videos featuring the fishing pole traps and the Greek gift sacrifices, because I noticed that some of you might have missed some of these amazing gems, and so it is time for you to catch up. But don't forget to share this video, hit the like button and subscribe. You start with e4, e5, knight to f3, they'll play knight c6 and bishop c4, the Italian game. This is what I want to simplify for you guys, and they'll play the top played move in the Lichess database, which is bishop c5, copying your moves. Instead of playing pawn to c3, going into the normal gioco pianissimo, I want to recommend something else to quickly punish your unprepared opponents, especially beginners and intermediate level players. Pawn to d3, cause this move forces black to castle short early, which is what we want in this opening. And that's why knight to f6 is the top played move in the Lichess database, because you know black just wants to castle short early. But spoiler alert, we are not thinking of castling short early. In other words, castle short is not part of our plans. You want to start making your plans right in the opening stage when the game starts. Anyway, after black plays knight to f6, I highly recommend that you go knight g5, putting more pressure on the f7 pawn, which is only defended by the king. And this is why you will see everybody castling short, because I mean, that's the only way they can defend that pawn, which is why I like this line so much, you guys. And now this is when you play pawn to c3, taking the game back into the gioco pianissimo normal variation. And what else does black play? You can see in the Lichess database, look at this. Pawn to h6 is the top played move, because black doesn't like your knight, which is sitting in his territory. So pawn to h6 is what you're going to see them playing. And whenever you see this, don't play what other people play in the Lichess database, knight to f3. Just simply play pawn to h4, guys. I know this is not objectively the best according to Stockfish, but hey, you're not going to be playing Stockfish. Look, engines have their own way of making strategies. Stockfish is calculating the possibility in the endgame, which most humans are not good at. E.g., if your human opponent foolishly takes on g5, thinking they just won a free piece, well, you can just take back, and this may soon lead to mate if black goes knight h7, the top played move, after which you can just play queen h5, and there's something like a mate in 4 which black cannot stop with his anchor bone, so there's nothing that black can do in this position. I leave that up to you guys. Find a mate in 4 in this position and leave your answers in the comment section down below. I'll check them out and mark them later. Let's look at another line. What if black doesn't foolishly take your knight on g5 and instead they play something like pawn to d6, the top played move? Well, when I notice that my opponent is not taking my knight, well, I want to give them a second chance to think about this, okay? So what I do here is just to go pawn to f3, again inviting black to take my knight on g5, which is the top played move you can see in the Lichess database, because this time it looks like I blocked the vision of my queen, so it can't sit on h5. Watch, they all play h takes g5 because they think I don't have this. Nevertheless, I just go ahead and take back on g5. They go knight h7, but this is when I reveal my plan after pawn to f4, because anyways, I just renewed my queen h5 possibility, and there's nothing that black can do about it. For example, if they go pawn to g6, stopping queen h5, well, I have pawn to f5, just, you know, putting more pressure on the king side since black has already castled short. So the top played move in this position, I mean, after you play pawn to f5, is knight takes g5, at least taking one pawn. But in this position, there are so many things that we can do. For example, taking on g6 is okay, since black cannot take back our g pawn as their f pawn is pinned. The better move in this position, guys, is queen g4 instead of taking immediately. Well, the idea is very simple. Go queen h4 and mate on h8. If they play knight h7, which they do, by the way, I want you to find a checkmate in 2 before I show you in a second. So pause this video and try to find the best move in this position. This is for beginners, by the way. This is the only way you can improve your tactical vision instead of just watching. The time starts now. Alright, I think you found this move, queen takes g6 check. Hey, see that the f7 pawn is still pinned by our light square bishop, so our queen cannot be taken, and the only move that black can play is king h8, after which you now play queen takes h7, or even better, rook takes h7 checkmate. This is what we call a bicycle mate. Anyway, so this is what humans play, unlike stockfish, and I highly recommend that you try these lines as a beginner. Even though they are not objectively perfect, these are openings you play to gain experience. Anyway, let's look at some other possible lines. After you play knight g5 and pawn to h4, we saw that it's not every time black is gonna take your knight, allowing you to mate them in 4, but I also play pawn to d6, and it is here where I recommended to play a prophylactic move, pawn to f3, allowing them to change their mind, taking on g5 again. And we saw that taking is not good either, because we can just go pawn to f4 later and renew the possibility of going queen h5. We just looked at this line, but what if black doesn't still take on g5 but rather go pawn to d5 in this position? Well, when there's so much tension on the center, you'd better release the tension with the move e takes d5, at least attacking this knight. If they go knight takes d5, taking your free pawn, well, you can just retreat your knight back to e4 and in the process attack black's dark squared bishop. They have to retreat it, after which you anticipate the move pawn to f5, and to stop that, you go pawn to g4. This is the beauty of not castling short early. In the near future, you would love to castle your king on f1, just like I emphasized on in my previous video. Or if you manage to develop your queen side pieces very fast, you castle your king long and it will be safe. Of course, that will be after you safeguard your h4 pawn, maybe with a move pawn to g5 next. I want to show you how to play in a similar fashion with the 4 knights game Italian variation. So you start with your 2 knights first, like this. Why? Because there's a higher probability that your opponent is going to copy you. They play knight f6 if you develop your knights like this. Check for yourself in the Lichess database. See what people play. Knight f6 is the top played move. Anywho, after that, I propose you go bishop c4. Yes, this looks shaky in that black can sacrifice their knight on e4. In fact, this is what we want to see on the board. So after bishop c4 and black takes on e4, you have an option to play a tricky sideline that can make you win the game so fast. You don't really need to play the main line with knight takes e4. Try this, pawn to h4, and don't trust the evil bar for this. There's what we call human advantage and engine advantage. There are certain imbalances that only stockfish sees, unlike humans. So these are kinds of lines that confuses a lot of humans, because there are just so many options for them to take. They end up choosing the wrong ones. Anywho, the top played move is knight takes. We're also going to look at what to do if black just chooses to go back. So let's start with knight takes. Once this happens, just know you are playing the reversed Stafford gambit. Take back with your d pawn. Black can't play pawn to d5 because there are 2 of your pieces guarding the d5 square. The top played move is bishop c5 in this position. See what has happened to the evil bar. This is what I meant earlier when I said humans reason differently from engines. You see, bishop c5 is the top played move. You can check on Lichess, see what people do. Bishop c5, if not bishop c5, they play pawn to d6, all dubious moves. So reach this position, you will see your opponents responding with bishop c5 because they just want to cast a shot and start playing chess. So back to human advantage now, we are leading the ball. The move I recommend here is knight g5, but if you are feeling lazy to outplay your opponent like that, you can even make them lose their right to castle like this. After king takes, you go queen d5 check and win back your bishop. One advantage of playing like this is at least black will play the rest of the game with their king on the center of the board. It will be difficult for them to castle kingside by hand since the king has moved once. But my main recommendation obviously is knight g5, note bishop takes. So let's look at knight g5. Okay, you go knight g5. threatening to take on f7 with your bishop, or better with your knight. Most of your opponents are going to be castling. Look at the eval bar. Things are worse for black. We can just go queen h5, threatening to checkmate on h7. And I've won a lot of games like this, even against super strong players. Anywho, pawn to h6 is what most people play, and in this position you have a couple of good moves to make. For example, knight takes f7 looks familiar, right? There's a trap in the Vienna hybrid where we sacrifice the knight on f7 like this. Also, bishop takes is not much of a stretch. It's a good move. Almost anything that you can do works. But what I find brilliant is queen g6. This threatens mate in one move. Note that the f7 pawn is pinned to the king by our light squared bishop, so black can take our queen. If they do this, they just help us to pave the way for our rook, and there is an avoidable checkmate. So this is one beautiful trap in the 4 knights game Italian variation which attracted my eyeballs. Still in the knight takes c3 variation, which introduces us to the reversed Stafford gambit. We just finished looking at bishop c5 and we now know how bad it is. What if black plays bishop e7? Maybe that would help. You can see what the eval bar is saying. The game is now back to equality, if not white having a slight advantage. The best you can do here is to go queen d5. This is a checkmate threat in one move, so most of your opponents are going to be castling. And now that's when you can go knight g5, threatening to capture on f7. Simple chess. Again, there's nothing much black can do. They can't attack your queen. I mean, you just take. Now these kinds of moves are going to force your opponent to take the knight, but first they have an option to play queen e8, just holding on to everything. But guess what? Now you have this sneaky move, queen e4. You want to checkmate on h7. If they take, well and good, they're just going to help you pave the way for your king's rook. You're going to play queen h4 later and checkmate them like that. That's why they play pawn to g6. And guess what? Again, you can surprise them by sacrificing your knight on h7. This just looks too good in that if this happens, now you have h5. The goal is to pave the way for your king's rook. In fact, I've seen people playing this move. This should be the top played move on lichess, but after this, they usually take because king g7 runs into check. So king takes, we have all the time to flex queen f3. If rook h8, we have mate in 2 like this. In case you are lost, here is where we started from. The 4 knights game Italian variation with 4 knights developed like this. After knight f6, you want to give them a little chance to take on e4 by going bishop c4. Which they are going to do most of the times. In fact, I propose that you take a bit of time to play bishop c4 just to make them see knight takes e4. Some people just blitz out moves, pre-moving without thinking. Anywho, so you go h4. Note playing the main line, knight takes c3 is what we are still looking at. Let's look at the last variation. Instead of bishop c5 or bishop e7, black can also play pawn to d6. But just like in the Stafford, you always have these knight g5, queen h5 combinations, even queen d5 in some lines. So here, you want to start with knight g5, pressurizing the f7 pawn. Say, what if black plays bishop e6, the top played move? Listen, when you reach this position, just remember that in the Stafford, you always respect your bishop pair. Not just in the Stafford. Even in this opening, you need to take with the knight, not with the bishop. Leave your bishop like that. So always take with the knight. Get rid of your knight, and after that, you can take if you want, but that'll be a sheer waste of time. I love queen h5. This is check. Looks like that's a 1-0 move. There's pawn to g6, but we have queen g4. Oh, there's pawn to d5. Yes. There's queen takes e6. What about this? We have queen takes d5. End of line. Next, we might even think of playing bishop g5 and bring in the other rook. Oh, rook d8, queen e4. Bingo. And castle shot. Right, so back to the initial position of the 4 knights game where we just play bishop c4 back on move 4. Again, after knight takes e4, what do? Instead of playing the main line, you want to remember to go pawn to h4 first, because most people are going to take. But there are some doubting Thomases out there who don't love taking. In fact, the second common move in this position is knight f6. Black is still doing better, so we have to find a way of confusing them somehow. Note that this time if you just carelessly play knight g5, black has all the time in the world to play pawn to d5, kind of the late fried liver. It won't work well for you. So the move I recommend here is pawn to d4 immediately. Now you might say black can still play pawn to d5. You can tell by the eval bar things are not good for black. The game is back to equality. I mean, this trade only favors white if you think about it. Queen takes, they usually take back with the knight to avoid losing their castling right. And then that's when we take on f6. They take back. And then we go knight d5, targeting both pawns. I mean, at the end of the day, we are going to emerge with a lot of pawns and a better pawn structure, suffice to win the endgame. So pawn to d5 back in this position is not good, which is why pawn to d4 wins. Once again, if black doesn't take your knight on c6, helping you to transpose the game to the reversed Stafford, and let's say they just go knight f6, remember to start with pawn to d4, because d5 is not good enough. Due to that, we are going to be ahead in development. What I see people doing in this position is either advancing the pawn to e4 or just taking like this. Whenever this move happens on the board, just remember to go knight d5. That's the other purpose of playing knight c3, by the way. We want to go on d5 like we do in the Belgrade variation. If knight takes, which happens to be the top played move, you simply take back with your bishop. If bishop e7, you just go knight g5. I'm just playing the same thing. You won't see a lot of people simplifying your life like that. They usually castle short, but again, you have queen h5. So it is this pattern that I'm talking about at the end of the day. Bishop c4, knight g5, queen h5, and the game is over. We want to checkmate. If pawn to h6, wait a second. You can't just play queen g6 this time. This is where tactical skills and board vision come into play. You see, if you play queen g6, black can just take your knight and put their knight on e7. You are not going to checkmate anyone. So, because of the possibility for black to play knight e7 in the near future, this is where knight takes f7 makes a lot of sense. You want to walk away with a discovery in case of anything. So they are forced to give up their rook. And now you can either take with your queen, or better yet with your last squad bishop. If king h8, you even have a mating foe beginning with bishop takes. After pawn takes, you have pap. That's checkmate. If king f8, I don't recommend to sacrifice anything here. You're just going to lose both bishops if you look properly. I would give rook h3 a try, and that I'll just bishop g6, but I find castling short to be more decent. Don't worry about that. We don't care about the h pawn, we care about the development. If pawn to d6, we can even retreat the bishop back, and black is still in trouble. Queen e8, look at this, queen sacrifice, because if bishop that, there's mate in one. Of course, we cannot cover everything in this short tutorial, which is why I encourage people to check out my courses. The link is in the description down below, and that's how you support this channel, by the way. I want to show you how to play in a similar fashion with the reversed lucini gambit. First, you start with pawn to e4, and after black plays the top played move e5. The main reason why I love starting with bishop c4 instead of knight c3 is that I want black to play knight f6 first, so that I give them more time to develop their king side pieces before developing their queen's knight. You can see that the top played move is bishop c5. So now this is psychology chess. We are trying to force our opponent to play on our terms. When you start with bishop c4 and knight c3, there's a high chance your opponents are going to play bishop c5. That's the top played move. And now this is when you want to play pawn to d3, because there's a higher chance your opponents are going to respond with pawn to d6. This is kind of the reversed Italian for black, if you think about it. So why do they play pawn to d6 here? They are just paving the way for their light squad bishop again to support the move knight g4, and that's the move you want to see. By the way, this is the main area of my meet, you guys. This is the line that mirrors the lucini gambit, where you go pawn to f4. The lucini gambit works perfectly against the d3 Italian game. Now we are seeing this from white side. It's like black played the d3 Italian game now with their pawn on d6. Great. So we can safely go pawn to f4. Of course, this is called the Vienna hybrid Spielmann attack. Point is, if black plays the top played move knight g4, now this is when you do the same thing that you do in the lucini gambit, pushing your f pawn one step forward. Point is, if they play knight f2, double attacking your queen and the rook on h1, now this is when you play queen h5. If they take your rook, you are going to checkmate them like that. And guess what? The top played move from here is castle short. This is what most black players do. But this turns out to be a big blunder. This time, not even playing knight h3 but bishop g5. But hey, let's see what can happen if knight h3, just an experimental move. See that again, you have a possibility of checkmating your opponent, as we saw before, if black takes your h rook. Because now you can go knight g5, wanting to checkmate on h7. If they play pawn to h6, this time you take on f7 with your knight once again. After rook takes, you first of all take on h7 with the queen, so that once the king moves, now you simply play which move? Pawn to f6, wanting to checkmate on g2. Remember what I said with black pieces? If queen takes on f6, you have checkmate on g8 this time. And let's just say if pawn takes, you now go in with bishop takes h6. And I don't know what can stop mate on g7 in this position, or mate on g8. Maybe bishop f2 may be played, but you can just go king f1, not even playing king d1 due to the possibility of bishop g4 check. So you just avoid all the checks. If knight g3 check, you will just take like that and the bishop is in trouble. And next you're going to mate in any way you like. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the reversed lucini gambit, if you think about it, but officially known as the Spielmann attack, Vienna hybrid. Once again, you want to start with the bishop's opening, and then if black plays knight f6, attacking your undefended pawn, this is when you play knight c3, defending it. And the position that you want to get is one where black plays bishop c5 first, or the reversed Italian with pawn to d6 later. Our Spielmann attack doesn't work perfectly if black plays knight c6. So you don't want to see knight c6. Just like in the Italian, you first of all want to see the move bishop c5, which is the top played move. And now this is when you go pawn to d3. Remember, you don't want to play knight f3. That is going to transpose back to the normal king's pawn game. We want to push pawn to f4 later, so we play pawn to d3. Once again, if black plays d6, you want to play f4. Knight g4, you simply close the line on f5. And after knight f2, this is when you play queen h5, wanting to checkmate. If black castles short, you don't always need to play knight h3, the line that we just finished looking at. Even better in this position is the move bishop g5, as I said earlier, because there's no way black can play pawn to f6. That pawn is pinned to the king. So they play queen e8. And now guess what? Even though you have so many things to do, knight d5 qualifies because it comes with so many threats. As you can tell, even pawn to f6 supported. Again, black can't play pawn to f6 if you think about it, due to checkmate in 2. Knight takes, double check with your knight and bishop. After king h8, only move, queen takes h7. So pawn to f6 is out of the equation. Maybe they should just go on and take on h1. Once again, you have knight f6. Check. This is going to win the queen. There's nothing else black can do apart from taking. If they play king h8, you have queen takes h7 checkmate. So they have to take, after which you take with your bishop. And I don't know how black can stop this checkmate. In fact, there's a mate in 4 here. So that's how you play the reversed lucini gambit. After playing bishop c4 back on move 2, which is the bishop's opening by the way, most of your opponents will start with knight c6, the top played move in the Lichess database. And now, this is when you can simply play knight c3. Why not playing knight f3 this time as in the reversed Stafford gambit? Look, our goal is to play the reversed lucini gambit. Remember, so we don't want to put any piece in front of our f-pawn because we want to play f4 someday, given a chance. So, if you want to play the reversed lucini gambit, forget about the move knight f3 or queen f3, forget about that. And that's why you start with knight c3 first. You want to play pawn to d3 and given a chance, pawn to f4. Most of your opponents are going to play knight f6 or bishop c5 in this position. Well, it doesn't even matter even if they start with knight f6, you can just play pawn to d3. And what do we see in the Lichess database? Bishop c5 is the top played move. You're going to see most of your opponents playing this move because they want to castle short, maybe after playing pawn to d6. But wait, frankly speaking, this is known as the bishop's opening Vienna hybrid, but I'm just calling it the reversed lucini gambit so that you guys don't forget. I want you guys to know that chess history may repeat itself. So what do we do in the Vienna gambit? The main move to play is pawn to f4. After pawn to f4, you are going to see your opponents playing pawn to d6. as evidenced in the Lichess database once again. They do this to pave the way for their light squared bishop, also supporting the upcoming knight g4. If you think about it, they would love to get the weak f2 square, this time with their knight and bishop. What do you do next? See, knight f3 can wait. In fact, the mainline Vienna hybrid is where you play pawn to f5. You don't want to allow that bishop g4 pin to happen, so you just go pawn to f5. And these are the times where you're going to see your opponents castling short, because what else can they do? Now you want to follow it up with bishop g5. This is another hidden trap that you're about to see, you guys. Most of your opponents are going to be playing pawn to h6. Why not? But do you know that you can sacrifice that dark squared bishop by just playing pawn to h4? Most of your opponents won't see this coming. Point is, after h takes g5, you can simply take back like that, wanting to capture the knight. And if they play something like knight h7, guess what? Now you go in with your queen h5. Wanting to checkmate either on h7 or on h8, and from here black can't stop a mate in 5. They can't even push the f pawn, by the way, it is pinned. How about bishop takes f5? But this again fails due to e takes f5. The threat is still there. I mean, even if black plays rook e8 trying to escape, but guess what? After king f8, you don't even have to go queen h8, you just go pawn to f6 in this particular position, because on the next move you are going to checkmate black. Like that. If they take, guess what? They just paved their way to hell. Queen takes f7, checkmate. I want to show you how to play in a similar fashion with the reverse Stafford gambit. So now you are having white pieces, and of course you start with e4, then black will respond with e5. We intend to start with the bishop's opening because that allows black to play the top played move knight to f6, attacking the undefended pawn on e4. And this is when we go knight to f3, giving black one more chance to take on e4, which they do most of the times. After which you now go knight c3, again letting white to take on c3 so that we can take back and reach this critical position which you're seeing on the board right now. Now I know this is the Boden-Kieseritzky gambit, and I did cover a lot of lines of this gambit in the video that has popped up in the card above, also known as the reverse Stafford gambit. But the move that I did not pay attention to very much is bishop e7, which is the main area of our meat in this study. So of course in my last video I only covered knight takes e5 because that's just the free pawn, so that after castle shot, you now go queen f3, putting more pressure on this f7 pawn. To be honest, this is very much okay, but following the exact move order that we used with black pieces, we can just avoid taking the pawn on e5, which is free, and rather go pawn to h4 on move 6. Remember, with black pieces, after white played bishop e2, this is where we played pawn to h5, again on move 6. And we saw what happens if white castles short. So now let's see how this can go with white. If castles short, which is a blunder, again we go knight g5. You can see the top played move is pawn to h6, after which we can now go queen d3. Intending to mate on h7 once again, just like what we did. And look at this, guys. The top played move in this position is pawn to g6, where black tries to stop you from checkmating them. But again, this is a blunder because we have queen takes g6 check. Black's f7 pawn is pinned to the king by our light squared bishop. So on the next move, we are going to mate black like this. And let's say, even if black doesn't play pawn to g6 and they play h takes g5, well, we can just take back and there's nothing black can do to stop us from checkmating on h7 or h8. Even if they decide to take with their bishop right on move 8, for example, bishop takes g5, we can just take back with our pawn, and once again they'll play pawn to e4, the top played move, of course. They think you're going to take so that they can pin your queen to the king. In this position, the best move, ladies and gentlemen, is queen d5. But sticking to what we know in our black opening repertoire, we go queen g3. And after pawn to d5, the top played move once again, remember what we did in the actual Stafford gambit where we took on h3, but this time it's on h6, wanting to checkmate on g7. If g6, this time we can't take on g6 because black's f7 pawn is not pinned by our light squared bishop. So the move is bishop g5 once again, attacking the queen, and after pawn to f6, we just play bishop f4, wanting to take on g6 and mate on g7. For example, if black carelessly takes our light squared bishop, if they play pawn to g5, we can even take on c7, that's just the free pawn. If queen d7, we just castle long. This is the same position that we had even with black pieces against white. Let's look at other lines that black can try instead of the ones that we have looked at so far. We have seen that after playing queen d3, pawn to g6, h takes g5 and bishop takes g5 are all blunders. What if black plays pawn to e4? Remember the position that I asked you to keep in mind. This is the position that you always want to recall as a Stafford gambit player. Never to take with your queen, because once again, your knight will be free on g5. So don't make this mistake. Black has rook e8. Again, this will pin your queen to the king. So instead of taking with your queen on e4, you better take with your knight, just like what we did with black. And see that in this position, black doesn't have bishop f5. Black is down a tempo. They are behind development. So this will be good for you. Again, if you see them taking the free pawn on h4, you can just go pawn to g3. You don't want to entertain this dark squared bishop. And I said taking on h4 is always a blunder because of bishop takes h6. Again, a bishop sacrifice that we saw even with black pieces. If g8, you have rook takes. On the next move, you want to play knight f6 check and mate with your queen on h7. If king g7, you still go knight f6, wanting to mate on h7. If rook h8, you go rook h7 check, rook takes, queen takes check, king takes f6, then you go queen takes f7 check. Let's say they go king g5. In this position, there's a mate info that I would love you guys to find. Again, just like I always do, I'll check your answers and shout out your names in my next video. This is how we learn chess, ladies and gentlemen. These chess puzzles are very important, ensuring that you are also participating and not just watching. So let me know in the comment section down below the answer to this puzzle. Still looking at the bishop e7 line, where I advised to try pawn to h4 instead of knight takes e5. So I just showed you what to do after castling short. What if black plays pawn to d6 in this position? Well, you still go knight g5, it's not much of a stretch. Again, if they castle short, you know what to do already. I mean, anything is playable in this position, but this position is a little bit different because black's pawn is not on h6. Black's d pawn is on d6, so you can go queen f3, which is the best move, but again, queen d3 is not much of a stretch. You simply want to mate. If they play pawn to g6, you go pawn to h5. Yeah, leaving your knight for free because you have a more deadly attack coming. If pawn h6 instead of taking, you can even take on h6 because after bishop takes, you have an in-between move. G takes f7 check. If king h8, you take the free bishop, and on the next move, you're going to take the rook. I want to show you how to play in a similar fashion with the mainline Caro-Kann-Tartako variation, which you're going to see in a minute. My own lines again after e4 and c6. You just go pawn to d4, and the moment black plays d5, now you go knight c3, the so-called classical variation, if I'm not mistaken. The whole point being after pawn takes, you take back with your knight, not with your elbows. And after knight f6, you just exchange knights and then play knight f3. Why knight f3? Because you're inviting black to play bishop g4, which they like doing most of the times. Anyways, they play bishop d6 and then you go bishop d3. So you start with these two pieces, not wasting moves with pawn to c3 yet or bishop e3. The whole point is after black castles short, all you want to do is to go h4. Not objectively the best, but it works, especially against humans. If rook e8, you can play bishop e3, but I find bishop e3 to be more shaky due to bishop f4 or f5, f4. So the best you can do is to put your king on f1. You can see Stockfish says the game can be dead equal. In fact, here is the position that you're going to be having most of the times. Most of your opponents will be playing bishop g4, which throws away all the advantage. Bishop g4 is the top played move on liches, which allows bishop takes h7 check, and after king takes, you can go knight g5 check. If king g8, you win back the bishop and take with your h-pawn, go queen h5 next. If pawn takes, you first of all take back with your h-pawn, and whatever black does, you take that light squad bishop, maybe queen e7. Be careful, they want to checkmate you. So you just play bishop d2. If they play something like queen e4, you still go queen h5 because you want to checkmate. If they play king f8, trying to run away, guess what? The best you can do here is to go rook e1, attacking the queen. And sorry to say, there's nothing much that black can do. The game will be checkmate very soon, or black will lose a queen. In fact, in this position, black just has to give up their queen because there's nothing they can do to stop checkmate on a cheat. And that's all for today, you guys. Let me know which episode you liked the most in the comment section down below. And if at all you would love to see more of these kinds of content where I compile my favorite videos in one collection, of course, to make it easier for you guys, let me know. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, bye bye.